In 20 days' time, Zimbabweans will be heading to the polls to elect a new president, but Human Rights Watch is concerned, and those concerned are detailed in a report which they have published. We speak now to Idriss Nassah from Human Rights Watch to tell us more about the findings of the report. Thank you very much, Idriss, for your time this afternoon. Firstly, let's start with how this report was put together.
Oh, thank you for having me. Human Rights Watch spent weeks in Zimbabwe in April and May investigating the pre-election environment to find out whether Zimbabwe can comfortably say that it is prepared to hold what can pass for free, fair, credible elections. So we spoke to a number of people, civil society activists, NGOs, lawyers, human rights organizations, victims of political violence. We spoke to political parties, their representatives, and various other ordinary Zimbabweans to gauge the temperature ahead of this very important August 2023 election.
What is the history of election-related violence in Zimbabwe?
Zimbabwe's got a protracted and very difficult, history of election-related violence, starting from actually its, very first election as an independent country in 1980, coming all the way up to the present. People would remember the very violent nature of the 2008 election, for example, where hundreds of opposition supporters of the then Movement for Democratic Change were killed, thousands displaced. But that is not only the history of violent elections that we have in Zimbabwe. As recent as 2018, in August, after the first election without Robert Mugabe on the ballot, in Harare, protesters post-election, were gunned down in the streets of Harare, and that's all related to the contested nature of Zimbabwe's electoral process.
I note that the research was only conducted in Harare and another place not so far, but did you go into Bulawayo? Because when you speak to Zimbabweans, they'll tell you almost of a tale of two cities, not just about Harare and Bulawayo, but also the rural and the urban vote. We'll get into that aspect in a few moments. Idriss Nassah, are you still with us?
So I can hear you.
Okay.
So we spoke to various people across the country, and the experiences, especially in the rural areas where the majority of Zimbabweans live, is one where the opposition is not free to mobilize. Opposition party supporters are not even free to move around wearing any clothing with their political party regalia. So the space is very restricted, not only in Harare but across the country. I'll give an example. In January this year, in a place called Murewa, opposition party members were meeting at a home of one of their members, and at that meeting, alleged ZANU-PF supporters invaded that homestead. Then, as they took a video, they assaulted these opposition political party supporters, and this is in Murewa, which is outside of Harare. So the restrictions are not only confined to the urban areas. In matter of fact, as we did our research and spoke to the opposition and other civil society and NGOs, they are able, to some extent, to mobilize, meet, and carry on activities in the urban areas. The situation is far worse in the rural areas, in the countryside, where in some areas actually, it is in our report that ZANU-PF, together with some state security agents, have declared these rural areas no-go areas for the opposition, and even for civil society organizations that want to do pre-election voter education, pre-election monitoring, and post-election monitoring. So they are not able to freely go into these rural areas to do their work.
Idriss, you mentioned the 2018 vote, and in your recommendation you suggest that Zimbabwe allows national and international electoral observers, human rights monitors and journalists seeking to observe the elections to monitor or report on the elections and have access to all parts of the country. In 2018, the AU observer mission said that by and large the process of the elections was peaceful and well administered. The EU had a completely different view. It reported about an unlevel playing field, intimidation, a lack of trust, and so it goes. And so on the recommendation of observer missions, the work of observer missions that comes with very different outcomes, especially when we speak of the African Union, what did people tell you on the ground about what they want to see where observer missions are concerned?
Well, the credibility of this election will be measured against the standards of the African Union, Charter on Democracy and Elections, as well as the SADC, principles and guidelines on, on democratic, on democratic elections. So these are the standards that this election has to live up to, and these standards also stipulate that there has to be a free and fair electoral observer mission where the observers are free to go into various and all parts of the countries. And in this instance, we actually have a case where the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe did publicly mention that only observers from friendly nations will be invited to observe the election in Zimbabwe, and that is problematic. Secondly, as it is, not all local national observers are able to penetrate into rural areas because of the challenges they face with, security. Some places are no-go areas, which means that if any electoral malpractices are ongoing at the moment, they will not be reported upon. And that eats into the credibility of the entire electoral process. So it is imperative that Zimbabwe allows election observers to come in, and that they freely go to all parts of the country so that their reports are credible, their reports are based on first-hand information, and that they go about their work without facing any threats or obstacles placed in their way.
Idriss Nassah is with the Human Rights Watch, and you can catch that report on their website. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.